Welcome back, everyone, to another new episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. If you missed last episode, per usual, a quick refresher. We hosted Kelsi Hams. So she shared her areas of treatment specialty because she is a therapist / social worker like us. So she talked about the population she works with, as well as she also broke down a couple different, or a few, I think we focused on a couple, but modalities for treating anxiety and trauma. This week, we welcome back another return guest, Chris Seams, and we will be exploring different levels of mental health treatment hospitalization. So we are going to go a little bit further, talk about different types, and maybe throw in some new information to build off of her last topic whenever she came and joined us. So welcome back, Chris. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Chris. Yes, welcome back again. We appreciate you joining us. For those that haven't had a chance to listen to the previous episode, do you mind giving a brief introduction, who you are, and why this topic is so important to you?
Sure. I'm Chris Seam, and I've been diagnosed with PTSD along with depression and anxiety. And I just want to make others aware of the different levels of treatment, that maybe hospitalization isn't always the go-to.
I know last time we made it a point to, before we jump into the topic, I think I can speak for both of us when we always say, our guests, we always appreciate and thank you for your vulnerability and your transparency, for sharing your own treatment experiences, your own diagnoses. Those things in our world are very important to talk about, and we appreciate your sharing that with us and our community.
You're welcome.
And we like to talk about these things because they are very, very much so still, for whatever reason, very stigmatized and not talked about or shamed. So talking about hospitalization and the different levels of care is important, so people know what kind of options are out there for them. And sometimes it's not always the first go-to, and sometimes we're there, and that's what we need. And then that stigma can keep us from pursuing the things that we actually need. So, but thank you again. I know today you wanted to speak on the differences between a locked medical unit and a stabilization unit. So as Amanda and I go, we might toss in some information and add to your experience from a different lens, but go ahead if you would like and break down the difference between those two types of units for our listeners.
Sure. Well, I've been in both, and the main difference, at least in my experience, was the hospitalization unit was more med focused, and while the stabilization unit was heavy on therapy.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
There was a lot more freedoms with the stabilization unit too. We could leave with staff. We could have our phones. We could have visitors. It was real life creeped in a lot more.
So what is the determination in your experience? What determined whether you were in a locked medical unit versus, it sounds like maybe like a crisis stabilization floor?
Yeah.
Like, how does that get determined?
In my experience, it was whether I was an immediate risk for suicide, or whether I could be safe in a non-locked unit.
Okay, that's fair. And yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize what that actually looks like. And just in my own practice with other like employees and clinicians that I have within the practice, recently we've been noticing an uptick of even if we didn't necessarily recommend, we would get messages from clients or calls later. Hey, I ended up in a hospitalization unit, or hey, I'm starting a PHP or an IOP, just because the world has been that challenging for so long for the past few years that we're a lot of people are kind of hitting a breaking point. And I appreciate this topic because it's like, if you were in an accident and you got to the hospital and you're in the ER and they're like, hey, we got to get them to the ICU, or we need to take you to surgery, right? Like, that's not a question. We just do it because that's what's medically necessary to care for you. And yet when
Yes.
it comes to our mental health, which oftentimes does manifest with physical symptoms as well, there's still that difference of how it's viewed, how we feel about what's being recommended. So if you can explain or share like what your experience has been like, maybe working through some of that stigma yourself, or have you seen providers with that stigma or trying to break it, or other folks that you were in the unit with working through that?
Um, Thankfully, I didn't have a lot of stigma. I mean, some of my friends, when I came home from the stabilization unit, I got called crazy. Um, but thankfully, I didn't get a lot of it from my team or from my medical providers.
Can you speak a bit more on that, Chris, if you don't mind, like that the treatment team approach? Like, I don't need like a whole lot of detail or who your providers are
Right.
or anything, but like, what does that look like for somebody who is like, I don't want to go in and feel alone and like feel like I'm just locked in a room, and all these misconceptions of what people think that looks like, when in reality there is a
Mhm.
treatment team around you.
Yes. I have an excellent treatment team. When I was going into the stabilization unit, my caseworker and my therapist were communicating pretty regularly, pretty on the regular, um, about what I needed and that I really should be in the stabilization unit. So, and then when I got there, I had a whole new team while I was there. Thankfully, my therapist was the therapist for the facility. So that was a bonus. Um, and then plus my caseworker was also communicating with the facility. And then I left with a treatment plan. So, which added more to my treatment team.
Yeah, so it's very like integrative. Like there's your current providers, if you're seeing anybody currently, will be as involved as you're comfortable in consenting them, excuse me, to be. So you're not going into this like you have people that know about you, people that you've given permission to share things that you guys have agreed that are important, or to be shared with the staff at the facility. So I heard you say, so case manager, therapist, and then your therapist kind of ended up being the same one that was on the unit, which,
Yeah.
like you said, I that's lovely. Doesn't commonly happen, but you'll have a
No.
therapist in there. And then if you have providers that, already established, they will all be in communication with each other, and a psychiatrist if somebody, gets medication adjustments while they were there. Was there any group type stuff led by?
Yes,
Mhm.
we had 3 groups a day, even on the weekends.
Very nice.
It was the stability unit was very therapy heavy. I also saw my therapist twice a week.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So the stabilization unit, more therapy heavy. You get a treatment team set up regardless, but it just really, it sounds like depending on the 2 units, what stage of treatment what you'll be focusing on with your treatment
Yeah.
team. And even if you go in and you don't have established providers, that can be the beauty of like an outcome of that. You walk out, like you said, with a treatment plan, and that involves like, hey, here are some referrals, like we've talked about, maybe helping you get linked up. Maybe that was already done for you while you were going through your inpatient stabilization treatment.
Yes, I started seeing OT, occupational therapy there, and then I continued after I left.
Love that. Since I've become a clinician, and especially since I worked in integrated care in doctor's offices, I've really really started to appreciate and utilize, because we do treat from a holistic approach in my practice, and learning about, like, I've been to PT before for like injuries or things like that. But learning about the benefits of OT and how much crossover there is with mental health therapy and social work is just a beautiful mesh. And the other therapy that recently I found a lot of really benefit from with my clients, and then personally too, is pelvic floor therapy. Like, I know this is a little one-off, but like, you don't realize how many things in your body are connected to our pelvic floor. So I appreciate when you get into somewhere like a stabilization unit, they can look at you from a whole person perspective and have different trained
Yes.
background people come in and check you out and say, hey, this might be helpful. Do you mind sharing what, as much as you're willing to, what it was, what your symptoms were, or why the recommendation for OT was made, and is that benefiting you? What kind of things do you do in OT?
OT helps with the stresses of daily life. They work in an organization and keeping my house up.
And like daily living, like
Yeah,
helping me with navigating, like when
yes,
people hear, well, so OT, I don't know if we said that, occupational therapy.
yes,
Then occupation doesn't just mean jobs, but I always kind of word it to people like things that sometimes have to occupy my time. I have to be active in. So I love that they connected that, those dots, and we're like, hey, this would probably be helpful. Like, here's some of these skills that we can start building while you're here. And then, did you follow up with them after? Like, was that a kind of
yes,
ongoing? Mhm.
yes. I still see occupational therapy once a week.
I love that so much.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about stabilization, we've talked about hospitalization. Chris, have you, and you've been in outpatient therapy because that was your therapist that is
Yes.
in the unit too. Have you done any other levels of care or learned about like PHP or IOP that you have any wisdom to share for people?
Sadly, we don't have that available here. I mean, I wish we would, but it's just
Yeah.
not.
In our area, it's when we refer out, like you have to, for listeners, IOP is intensive, keep choking, intensive outpatient, and then PHP is partial hospitalization programming. So that's where some programs have the requirement, you start out fully inpatient, and then it's kind of a step down approach. So you'll be really, really intensive, and then we'll step down, add a little bit of more outpatient kind of to it. Like you might come for 5 days out of the week and be there all day those 5 days, and then it kind of staggers down to less and less intense from there. So yeah, you have to kind of go. In our area down here, it's either Columbus or some other larger surrounding cities. So it's not always the most accessible right now.
Right. We would have to go, I believe, up to Toledo.
Yeah. I'm way down here southeast. So we usually have to send to Cincinnati or Columbus.
Right.
I know, I apologize, being in the world, I'm like so used to the acronyms and I forget that not everybody is. So thanks for describing, Kelsi. And then I also wanted to say a little bit of hope there is that I know through COVID and just the virtual services and telehealth really booming because of that, there are more frequent options, not always, but sometimes it can be an option to do virtual, which, has its pros and cons, especially for something like a partial hospitalization when you're supposed to be there 5 days a week and really engaging in the group environment. It might not be the total feel, but I have people that have done IOP, mental health, substance use, dual diagnosis virtually and are getting a lot of benefit from it. So that can be an option sometimes too.
Do you do the therapy, Chris? We're asking you a lot of, I don't want those to be invasive questions, but I know you also said you're willing to share your experience.
Yeah. So. No, it's perfectly fine. Yes, I have been doing telehealth therapy for over a year now.
Nice.
Do you do that like with a lot of your providers, primarily like your ongoing therapist?
No, only my therapist.
Okay, so these other programs that you've kind of went through that
Yes.
have been like in person or on unit or
Yes.
things like that.
Yes.
How do you feel about teletherapy? I like asking people from their perspective, because for us, I can only speak, I mean, I see my own therapist telehealth, and I don't mind it, but I feel myself preferring in person, but I found somebody that I really click with, so I don't want to
Right.
switch and find somebody in person. But how do you feel about it?
In some ways, I think in person would be better, but telehealth allows me, even when I'm not feeling well or unable to leave the house, I can still do therapy.
Yes, that accessibility.
There was a long period where I wasn't leaving the house, so I still allow therapy to continue.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. There's so many benefits to teletherapy. I think just in general, like people that work a quote unquote like standard 9 to 5 type job and they were having a challenging time getting in with their provider. Now I can see you on my lunch and I can just go out to my car, or I can find a private room in the office where I can do that, or rather than having to drive, even if it's only 15-20 minutes, still you have to then take pretty much like 2 hours PTO. If you have PTO, you have to take 2 hours off, drive, go there. Yeah, and I appreciate in person as well. And I started going in person for my own therapy, and then as my pregnancy progressed, as I had a baby, as my business grew, I'm like, can we just do virtual? And it's been totally fine. I know that's not what this episode's about, but I always like to kind of sprinkle in there what we can to give more information about things. I appreciate being able to see people in their environment too, like their animals and like things that they might have told me about, like their artwork or their craft projects. And they'll be like, oh, look, this is the thing I made. And I'm like, yay, it's hanging in your room now. I love this. Or I don't know. I just think it's a little more personal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm not an occupational therapist, but I kind of in the same vein there. I have been able to do a lot more safely with my clients, like in their home. Like maybe there's something going on that is really overwhelming them. Like they've reached that like kind of fight or flight, but like shut down kind of place. And it's hard. It's hard for them to tackle some tasks within their space, whether that's a specific room or organization skills, or I've helped people work on so many things because like they can sit me up and then like I can see the things, versus them coming to my office. If they're already in that shutdown place, it's hard to describe and kind of walk through those same steps. So still like a level of care, but I like to talk with people on their own experience and how the new wave of telehealth for outpatient treatment. I didn't know if you'd done any kind of inpatient telehealth stuff or not.
Inpatient telehealth?
Yeah, or like any of your programming, I think you said you've only done telehealth with your outpatient therapist, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, very cool. Were there any things when you went to both of these types of units that, like, I guess the most helpful takeaways from both of those units, the medical and then the stabilization unit? So you like whenever you left, what was like a positive takeaway for you?
The medical, just that I was able to take, it was a 5-day break from life. I mean, I had almost no contact with anybody outside, and at that time that was what was needed. The stabilization unit gave me a lot of tools, and they hooked me with some new resources.
It sounds like all of that was in one hospital.
No, the stabilization unit is actually a separate facility.
Okay, I was gonna say, because I often hear stabilization, or not know of stabilization units as like crisis stabilization units. They're often connected to like where you might have a crisis hotline being answered there as well. I'm not sure if
Right.
that was your experience.
No.
No, okay. And then sometimes people can like just walk in, kind of like a drop in. It just depends where you go. Like sometimes all of that is in a hospital in different levels of care. Sometimes it's provided by the community's like local alcohol, drug, mental health board, or
Mhm.
one of their bigger like community mental health centers will have a crisis unit.
Yeah. It's run by my community health agency.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's helpful too, because then you already, have a
Yeah.
connection there. Did you every time you went inpatient or went to stabilization, were you already connected to your therapist?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering what that might look like for somebody that doesn't already
Yeah.
have a provider and finds themselves in this place.
I really can't speak to that. Sorry.
That's okay.
My caseworker and my therapist referred me to the stabilization unit, and then my therapist, in conjunction with the agency, sent me to the hospital.
Okay, gotcha.
I think that kind of falls into that place where it's like, oh, I may not have this whenever I go in, but that's what I really love. Like, if we're at that place, and like you said, like these things were needed, just knowing like this treatment team is looking at you, kind of like what we said earlier. I think it brings it full circle, but you're looked at as a whole person. And then if there
Yeah.
are things that you aren't connected to when you go in, which is super common, you may not have that experience, but a lot of people do. And like it's very likely you'll walk away with either already being connected with outpatient providers or with referrals, if you want to make those connections on your own.
Right.
So I heard a lot of professional support and professional
Yes.
referrals. I know often a part of treatment can also be family or just general social support. Was that a part of your experience at all?
Well, sort of. I did walk out of the stabilization unit with the peer support.
Okay, great.
Had you ever made any connections with um, other individuals like on the units and had like really like I don't know, like just strong connections, even if you didn't maintain them outside of the programming and things, but had you ever had a really like good group or just like social experiences while on either one of these units?
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
On the stabilization unit, I met two really um, nice women, and I'm actually maintain contact with one.
That's great. Yeah, I love the option of peer support. It's not available everywhere, just like all of these resources unfortunately aren't.
Right.
I think peer support is really getting a lot more funding and support though, so that's wonderful. Those are people that have been through the experience, but also have training to support another person as well.
Yes. Yeah, I know I'm very lucky in the area I live in. We have a strong mental health network.
That's great. Okay, Chris, so is there anything else about this topic that you wanted to be sure that our audience heard today before we close out?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. We appreciate you being here. And
Uh,
make sure everybody listening that you turn on your little notifications and follow and subscribe so that you don't miss out on all of our episodes. We are bi-weekly now, so the next episode will be in 2 weeks, and we're going to be talking to Nikki Boggs. We've had one massage therapist on here before, Gina Goodson. We're going to have Nikki Boggs on here talking about trauma-informed massage therapy. I appreciate this topic so much, and I wish that all medical providers could be trauma-informed. It would help us so much, so I'm very much looking forward to that. But until then, everyone have a great day, and we will see you next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
I